a very special guest, Alexandre Matias. Thank you for being here.
Well, for starters, I'd like to tell you that English is not of course, my native language, and I think it's not yours. Who is born in an English native country here? There's very few people, so I'm like to be sorry about you. I think I'm gonna murder a little your language, but here we're gonna talk in the universal language, which is called bad English. So I will just apologize first because I'm not used to give speeches in English. So sometimes I may have to choose the right words and stuff like that. But thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. And I'd like to talk a little, because when Rodrigo and Fernanda called me to give this speech, I was wondering what should I talk about. And the first thing that I think about speaking to you was to talk a little about internet, Brazilian internet culture, because it's a very particular scene and it's a very huge scene at the same time. We are the second country in the world who most uses the Facebook besides the US, and we are huge on Twitter and stuff like that. We are a very internet-driven country. But I think if I was to present this culture to you, I think I would have to explain a lot of context for you to understand the jokes, understand the memes, and understand all the context. So I think it was some kind of thing that was take too much time for me to speak in such an hour. So I'd like to move further to another subject, which I think most of you must be familiar with, which is the protest that happens in Brazil last June. I don't know if you're aware, probably have seen the footage, and I don't know if you know what happens. People here in Brazil don't know what happened because it starts as a protest here in São Paulo for lowering the bus fare, and then it became something very huge. It spreads in the nation, and people start to protesting about everything, about corruption, about the government, about World Cup, and I don't know if you just arrived here in Brazil 2 or 3 days, so you don't have the experience to see what was Brazil just a few days close to the World Cup. People here who, we were expecting, of course, the World Cup, but the vibe for the World Cup was not in here. People, a lot of friends of mine from the other countries were asking, oh, how come Brazil is not too excited? Because there was those huge shadow from last year's protests that create something that spread for the whole population, which was an expression that people repeated all over. That was, imagine what happens in the World Cup. So all the problems that we had on daily basis here in Brazil, people just thought, oh, if it's like this today, imagine when the World Cup happens. People predicting the worst thing would happen because the country doesn't have the structure or the way of dealing with people from another countries, or even how to deal with a championship so huge as the World Cup. But now, since the World Cup started, this euphoria virus just took the nation. So now you probably have wandering through the streets of Vila Madalena. It's not like carnival. It's not always like that. But people are. You have seen the Vila Madalena yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's not like that at the same time. It's something that happens here in Brazil, just in carnival, and not like this in São Paulo. In some cities in Brazil, you have this people in the streets, and this good vibe feeling happens all the time. And now we are in the right mood for the World Cup. So what happened? The protests haven't resulted in nothing. People started to become optimistic from one minute to the other. So I would like to go back in time, a lot back in time. I would like to talk a little about the history of Brazil. I don't know if you are aware of what is your knowledge in our country. Brazil is a very young country. We have 500 years, almost the amount of age of United States, but we have a very peculiar colonization, because we were colonized by Portuguese Empire, which is the first global empire in an era that people wasn't talking about globalization. Portuguese Empire was the first global empire, even before United Kingdom. And it has a lot of colonies all over the world, Asia and Africa, and of course South America. And we were very accustomed, very used to, to being treated as a colony. When Brazil became an independent country, it happened in the 19th century. It was almost a concession that the Portuguese crown gave to Brazilian people. Because when the Napoleon Wars were happening in Europe in the beginning of the 19th century, as the Napoleon troops started to come to Spain and later Portugal, the court of Portugal fled to Brazil, and they abandoned Portugal, and the capital of this global empire was transferred to Rio de Janeiro, and this happened in 1808. And just a mere 15 years later, in 1822, the son of the emperor, which was Don João VI, his son was called Dom Pedro I, gave the historical scream of independence. He shouted, "Independence or death," here in São Paulo, and it became a very traditional and historical moment here for us Brazilians. But we were very tied to the Portuguese crown, even if we started to act as an independent country. And this, as the 19th century progressed, this colony mentality evolved from Portugal to France, and then to the United Kingdom, and then to the US. Until, I don't know, 30 years ago, we were still seen as a colony to all other countries in the world. Mainly the United States, which, I don't know if you're aware, but Brazil has a period of military dictatorship that started in 1964. It was a coup d'etat that was sponsored by the US government, and the US knew that it was very important for them to keep have these good relations with a huge country in South America. Before this, a lot of the stuff that is connected to Brazil, that all people all over the world link to Brazil, such as coffee or Carmen Miranda or samba, or even soccer, were concepts that were created as some kind of political statement. Because, let me give some examples. When the state of São Paulo started to produce coffee, it ended in the period that the mineration of stones was going down, and all of a sudden Brazil was a huge coffee exporter. So our government invented a political way of selling the country as the nation of coffee. That's why even today we are famous for having a good coffee, even if it's not true nowadays. We have good coffee, so, but not the best coffee in the world. The same happens with samba. Samba was not a rhythm that was nationwide. It was restricted, mainly in Rio. And just for your information, the people who played samba were treated as thieves, outlaws. You go to jail if you played samba. But then Getúlio Vargas, which was another dictator that Brazil had in the 1930s, understood that if he wanted to rule the whole country, not just some central part of the country, which was Rio, São Paulo, and Salvador, which was our first capital, he has to create a national myth. And he, talking with some intellectuals from the time, he created a notion that samba was a musical rhythm that happens in all over the country, which was not true, but people started to assimilate this mainly because of radio. Radio was a huge tool for the state to spread its own propaganda. The same thing happens with Carmen Miranda. Everybody knows Carmen Miranda. It's a huge icon for Brazil. But she was not very huge here. Of course, people know because she was in Hollywood movies, but she was much known, much famous in Hollywood than in Brazil. Here we had another stars and other musicians that were much huge than hers. And I don't know if you're aware of a Disney character called José Carioca, which is a Brazilian character, it's a parrot, and it's in that movie Three Amigos with Donald Duck.
And the rooster Mexican.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the same politics. At the same time as the U.S. was dealing with Mexico, and they created a character for Mexican people, which is a character we deal with it in a lot of different ways. The guy with the huge sombrero and Speedy Gonzales and a lot of stereotypes that became from that moment. Disney also created José Carioca, Zé Carioca here in Brazil, which is, we had this word here for some kind of a trickster, which is called malandro. Malandro is the Brazilian trickster, which is very, very huge in our imagination. There's a way of dealing with even minor stuff, which we call, translated to English, the Brazilian way of life, the little Brazilian way of life, which is called jeitinho, which is the way that people, oh, I can be a little corrupt here, or I can bend some law here, and it's fine, everybody takes, there's no problem. And it became impregnated in our imaginary. And the same thing as soccer. Soccer wasn't a very popular sport, and when mainly the mayor in Rio de Janeiro and after all the governors in Brazil understood that people like to see those games if there was a competition between neighbors. So they started to give the soccer teams, which were very important in some neighborhoods, street soccer teams, and they started to grow. And now we have the Brazilian Championship and the States Championships that were all created for people to go and shout for their team. It's a kind of a twisted concept from the Roman motto, which is bread and circles. Here we just have circles and circles. No bread.
No bread.
A little bit of cachaça, maybe.
Yeah, a little of cachaça, sure. And the same stuff happens when the military gave the coup d'état in 1964, and as it happens in the 30s with Getúlio, the new dictators know that it was very important to control new media, and television was booming. It was the beginning of the 60s, and as the U.S. government gave money for sponsoring the coup d'état, it also gave money for start a huge national TV network, which is called Globo, which is the fourth television network in the world, just behind ABC, CBS, and NBC in the U.S., which is owned by the Marinho family, which is the richest family here in Brazil. And they both control the infrastructure, so anywhere in Brazil you can catch the global signal, and it's good in quality. And the content, they produce content that's mixed with a lot of our culture, of course, television. And since the beginning of our nation, we have this mentality. We are just a colony for people from abroad. Come here and get this stuff. Talking about World Cup, there's a concept that was created in the first Brazilian World Cup that happened in 1950, which is coined by a famous writer here in Brazil. It's called Nelson Rodrigues, which is a kind of a Brazilian Tennessee Williams, a very important playwright writer, and he was a very passionate soccer fan and chronist. And at the final game, we lost to Uruguay in the only time that the Maracanã Stadium has its own total capacity. At the time it was 200,000 people, and he chronicles in a very famous article that when the second goal happens and seal the Brazilian defeat, people became mute and leave the stadium without saying anything, without making any noise. This was called Maracanazo, which is the term, kind of, we see that moment as a kind of a battle within our own culture. And Nelson Rodrigues coined this term, is the street dog complex, which is Brazilians never are proud of themselves. They have to be recognized for someone from abroad and say, this guy is good, so the English guy said that it's good, so all Brazilians start to like these guys. The Brazilian dictatorship ended in 1985. It was a transition. The generals simply gave up, and we started to deal with in a period that has a lot of economic disturbance. We had a huge problem with inflation, hyperinflation indeed, which was almost 1,000% a month. It's very funny. People talking at my age, I'm almost 40. I was in my child and pre-teens years in that era, which is the late 80s. There are very funny stuff, funny now seeing in retrospect, about that time when people go to the supermarket in the morning because at night the prices will be higher. And there was a huge lines for buying meat. People had to just eat chicken because it doesn't have meat from cows for sale. And this changed in the beginning of the 90s with a president that was called Fernando Henrique Cardoso, which was the second president we elected after the dictatorship. The dictatorship has was almost 30 years with no direct vote, just the generals succeed one another. When the dictatorship ended, the Congress elected a new president, and when this new president, with some kind of a latifundiary from, I stayed here in Brazil, José Sarney, left, he opens the first free elections in Brazil since 1960, which was our last election that everybody could vote. But the second president, which was called Fernando Henrique Cardoso, he had an economic plan called Plano Real, which kind of stabilized the inflation, and people started to have the power to consume. People start to, you have to imagine now Brazil is coming to a very golden phase, even if you talk about economics. And but at that time, in the beginning of the 90s, 60% of Brazilian population were below the line of poverty. So when that happened in 1994, people started to buy stuff that they could never dream they could buy. Things like even a chicken for people to buy became a kind of a object of desire. And the 90s ended when Fernando Henrique Cardoso had two
Terms.
Thanks. 2 terms, he was re-elected, and then he tried to elect his successor. He couldn't do it, and that was in 2002 when Lula was elected. You probably know Lula, which is the most popular president we have in a long time. By far, the most popular president of Brazil, even in our country and abroad. People recognize him as a very important leader. And Lula is a very curious character because he was born in the northeast of Brazil. He was poor, he was passed through the times of hunger. He came to São Paulo to work in the lower level of workers. He started first in the civil construction, and then he went to work in the metallurgical.
Metallurgy.
People who work with iron. Car factory. And he was responsible for huge strikes that happened at the end of the military dictatorship. He stopped Brazil in a time that strikes were forbidden, and he was in jail. And he just after those strikes, he founded the PT, which is the party that is now the party that runs the country. And he was elected in 2002. And I'm saying that he was a very curious character because he wasn't seduced by the glamour of being a president. Of course, he had a lot of antics he had to follow, and of course, he's a president of a country. But he liked to appear. It's not so radical as José Mujica from Portugal, from Uruguay, which go to the Congress with sandals. But he made barbecues at his house. He liked to talk to the common people. He's a very populist guy. And he gave another time the power to buy again. So, but now people were a little more richer than in the 90s, and they started to buy stuff such as TVs with flat screens and computers and cars, and travel abroad and travel for the first time in airplane. And in his first term, he took almost 50 million people from Brazil to a new middle class. He took almost 50 million people from below the poverty line and now we have this whole middle class here in Brazil that was started to do things that they were not aware they could do, because as I was telling, we always saw us as a country, as a colony. We doesn't have our moment. We doesn't have self-esteem. We just have to serve the Lord. But somehow it happens that people started to get money, and the economy was stabilized, and people start to buy, and let me close this parenthesis for a while. Because at the same time, something was happening in Florianópolis, which is a capital in a sovereign state in Brazil. It's called Santa Catarina. The mayor of Florianópolis wanted to increase the bus fare, and people from the university, students mostly, became against it and started to protest and started to go on the streets and lay down the streets for the buses don't come. No, the scenes from protesting. This is 2005. At the same time, the same thing happened in Bahia, Salvador, which is the capital of Bahia, another state from the northeast. And those students from these two cities, very far from each other, started to recognize their problems as common. Oh, we had the same problem that you had in terms of bus fare. Oh, we had some problems with education. We had some problems with public health. And they started to exchange information, dealing with this new tool that was called the internet, which was now very popular in Brazil, like all over all other countries. We had some first moment of the internet with the World Wide Web in the beginning of the 90s, and then at the turn of the century with broadband and stuff, Brazilians started to get used to the internet. At the same time, those people from the poor levels that was starting to buy stuff, they could buy computers, and they could use the internet, and they could buy smartphones, and that was created that whole Brazilian internet culture, which someday I will talk about, but not today. But what was happening between Salvador students and students from Florianópolis?
Can I just add one thing for the Europeans? If you fly from Florianópolis to Salvador, it's a good 4 hours in a plane. So it's very far. That's why it's shocking that, it's two different, it's very far, and very different cultures as well. So just keep that in your mind, that maybe in your countries, Manchester and London, yeah, whatever. But Salvador and Florianópolis are really far away from each other, and very different colonizations and cultures.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks for that. And people started to, those students started to recognize with each other, and well, we had the same issues, so we should try to protest together. And they created the Movimento Passe Livre 2 years later, which translated to English is the movement for the free fare. They first started to demand free fare for all university students, and then to all students, and then for everybody. They say, we know that it's an utopia to ask for free bus fare for everybody, but it's that direction that we want to go. And they try to spread their seats in all over other countries, other capitals, through the internet. And then June 2013 happened. The mayors from São Paulo and from Rio de Janeiro increases the bus fare on only 20 cents, but the Movimento Passe Livre was already organized, and they go to the streets. And you have to understand that at the same time that they were organizing there was a lot of movements that was happening all over the world that very similar. We have the Arab Spring, we have the Occupy movement, you have the Desperados in Barcelona. Desperados. And have the riots in London, and all this information go through the web. All this information go from people shooting with smartphones and uploading to YouTube at the right time that it was happening. And then Movimento Passo Livre started to organize protests here in São Paulo and in Rio, and then it started to spread to all other cities. And all of a sudden, there's no explanation. People are still studying these movements. People started to go massive to the streets. I myself, I think there's a lot to do with the shopping mall culture, that when the first wave of consumption hit Brazil in the 90s, we enter in an era of a lot of shopping malls constructed here in Brazil. I think Brazil is the country in the world that has most shopping malls of all. I have very little cities that have huge shopping malls, and although the shopping mall sells itself as a simulacra to the square, to the streets, it's not. It's air conditioned. It's all this fluorescent white lights, and I think people started to reclaim the streets because they want the streets, and there was this happening, and so the protests that years earlier were just a few people started to get more people, and then in June 13 of last year, something happened very easy to understand why gave this movement massive weight. The two main newspapers from here in São Paulo publishes editorials saying that those people cannot stop the traffic here in our city. We have to reclaim the streets. The police should do their job and take these vandals off the streets. And the police understood the message. So if the newspapers are saying that, they are saying, well, you can hit everybody that we won't pay attention. And they hit everybody. And you had a lot of videos on YouTube. After I can show you, that computer here. That shows policemen shooting people without doing nothing, and hitting people without they doing nothing. They're just seeing the protest happen, and then the police was striking. But what happened? The newspapers, they could make a blind eye to what was happening, but people were uploading videos, they were uploading pictures, they were showing to each other what was happening. There was covered eyes. The people were being shot in the face. There was a famous image of a photographer from one of these newspapers that was shot in the face, in the eye. Another photographer lost an eye because he was shot by the police. And this spread at the evening. The next day, the same newspapers that was telling to the police do their job and take the vandals off the streets couldn't do the same thing, and they started to show what all people saw on the internet. Even TV networks weren't showing. That was a very funny situation that happened that night, when a very popular and polemic newscaster, which was very known is known even today for its violent methods, and he praises the police and say, good thief is a dead thief. He started a poll on the air, live, for all people to. Do you think these protests are fair? That people should be protesting on the streets, or the police should hit them? And then all of a sudden, people all started to say yes, the protests are valid. The people should have the right to speak themselves. And then all of a sudden, they saw the numbers and it changed. Oh no, yeah, people had the right to express themselves, and the police is wrong. It's very funny if you know the context here. I don't know if there's. I don't know. You saw the last RoboCop. There's that character from Samuel L. Jackson is some guy like this. And then when this happens, people who had nothing to do with bus fare or protests on the streets, families, workers, they started to say, no, this is not right. We should go on the street. We should support those people who are being hit by policemen and stuff like that. And in June 19 of last year, there was the huge manifestation that spread all over Brazil. People don't have the numbers, but here in São Paulo, it's said that 2 million people were on the streets. And at that same time, something very awkward started to happen, because people started to protest about everything. So, well, it's not just the main motto of the earlier protest was, it's just 20 cents. They were just trying to low down the 20 cents that was the increase that happened. And they did get it right. The mayors had to lower their heads and lower the bus fare to the price that was earlier. But all of a sudden, people who had nothing to do with the first movement started to go on the street and say, it's not 20 cents. There are a lot of stuff that is wrong in our country, and we should change. But it doesn't have focus. And so people start to protest about corruption, about violence. Who is not? Who is in favor of violence? Everybody is against violence. So there's no we should kill all the politicians. We should don't have more parties. The parties are all corrupted. So we should live in another political system. And the opposition to the government started to manipulate some sectors from these new protesters, trying to let's see if we can get Dilma, which is our president, down. It doesn't happen, fortunately, but this movement continue even aside from people from the Movimento Passe Livre. And then came the World Cup, and all of this is happening right now. We are waiting for not another Maracanazo happens, because Uruguay passed through Italy, and we are in a moment that our self-esteem is being, for the first time, we like to say that we are Brazilians. At the same time, we are facing a lot of fears, a lot of violent past. Brazil is known, even in academic circles or in historical circles, as a violent country that was constructed with violence. We had trades when we were a colony with sugarcane, with precious stones, with coffee, and with slave trade. Even from first with Indians, and then from Africa, and then from Europe, when people started to come to Europe in the beginning of the last century, fleeing from a lot of wars, and they came to Brazil, started little colonies here, and became slave workers for Brazilian rich people. There's even a classic anthropology book, which is called Triste Tropics, Sad Tropics, which is written by, I forgot the name, Claude Lévi-Strauss, which is French. And he said that Brazil was raised with three sad cultures, which is the Indian, which has a very melancholic way of living, the Portuguese, which has the same longing feeling, mainly because it's on the corner of Europe and had the sensation, oh, we were kings of the sea, now we're not. And Africans which were traded as merchandise. So we are a nation that was constructed with violence, with three races that haven't self-esteem, and we're starting to have this self-esteem. I even can't talk have it's back because it never happened. We had some moments of national euphoria, but they're all dealing with, wow, Bossa Nova is a very popular rhythm all over the world. Everybody knows Tom Jobim, everybody knows Sepultura, everybody knows CSS, but or the soccer team or stuff like that. We've never been proud of being Brazilian, and as this new middle class learn that they can buy whatever they can, they at the same time learn that there are things that they can buy that they should demand to their government. So we have people who are finally flying in planes, but the airports are scary. The people who could buy television, flat screen television set, and doesn't have a good place to live, housing project that can satisfy people. They could buy cars, but we don't have public transport that is efficient. If you look at the map, you probably have looked at the map of São Paulo subway and compare it to the map of the city. Is ridiculous, just 3 lines. But now people are starting to become aware of it. It's not something that the government should give because, oh, poor people, they want buses, so here are buses falling to pieces, but here they are. But people should demand, and I think we are in our late teens. We are ending the era of our teenage years and starting to see ourselves as an adult country. I think there's a lot of stuff that will happen. We have this World Cup happening right now. We have the president election happening in the end of the year. 2 years from now, we have the Olympics happens in Rio, which people are starting to tell that probably we'll go to another city, but they tell it about the World Cup as well. So we are dealing with the growing pains. We have to, just as a teenager, like a child start to become a teenager and then become an adult, has a lot of problems with the puberty. We are in the middle of our puberty, and fortunately, we're gonna enter in our adult age soon, I hope. That's it.